Sarah Chen missed the target again. The plasma bolt sizzled past the training dummy and scorched the wall behind it, leaving another black mark among dozens of others. Around her, the other recruits snickered and exchanged knowing glances. At 19, Sarah was already notorious throughout the Terran Defense Academy as the worst shot in the history of the institution. "Chen!" Drill Sergeant Morrison's voice boomed across the firing range. What in the seven hells was that supposed to be? Sarah lowered her rifle, her shoulders sagging under the weight of another failure. "Sorry, Sergeant. The targeting system must be off calibration again." Morrison strode over, his boots clicking against the metal floor of the training facility. Behind him, the other recruits continued their practice, but Sarah could feel their amused stares burning into her back. Marcus Webb, the top shooter in their class, made an exaggerated whisper to his buddy Jake about how Sarah couldn't hit the broadside of a starship if she was inside it. "Calibration?" Morrison grabbed the rifle from Sarah's hands and lined up a shot. The plasma bolt struck the target dead center, leaving a smoking hole exactly where the heart would be. "Seems fine to me, recruit. Maybe the problem isn't the equipment." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. She had been telling herself the same lie for months now, blaming everything except her own abilities. The truth was simple and humiliating. She was a terrible soldier. Her reflexes were slow, her aim was awful, and her tactical knowledge was purely theoretical. She had somehow scraped through the written exams, but when it came to practical application, she was hopeless. The worst part wasn't the mockery from her fellow recruits, it was the disappointment she saw in the instructor's eyes. They had all heard her story. The girl who had scored impossibly high on the military aptitude tests, whose psychological profile suggested she had the potential to be one of the greatest tactical minds of her generation. The girl who on paper looked like she could be the next Admiral Chen following in her grandmother's footsteps. Instead, they got someone who tripped over her own feet during marching drills. "Line up for hand-to-hand combat training," Morrison announced to the group. Sarah's stomach dropped. If shooting was her weakness, close combat was her nightmare. She was small, barely 5'3", and while she wasn't weak, she was nowhere near strong enough to compete with recruits like Webb, who looked like he had been carved out of granite. The recruits paired off, and as usual, Sarah was left standing alone until Morrison assigned her a partner. Today it was Lisa Park, one of the few people who didn't actively mock Sarah, but who clearly viewed her as a waste of space. "Try to at least pretend you belong here," Lisa muttered as they took their positions. The sparring session was, predictably, a disaster. Lisa was faster, stronger, and more skilled. Within seconds, Sarah found herself flat on her back, staring up at the ceiling of the training facility. Laughter echoed around her as she struggled to catch her breath. "Again," Morrison called out. Sarah got up only to be knocked down again and again. By the end of the session, she was covered in bruises and her uniform was soaked with sweat. Lisa hadn't even broken a sweat. As the other recruits filed out of the training room, chattering excitedly about their upcoming assignments to active duty ships, Sarah remained on the floor. She had failed every major test, barely passed the minimum requirements to avoid being kicked out, and was facing the very real possibility of being assigned to some backwater supply depot where she couldn't do any real damage. "Chen." Morrison's voice was softer now, almost gentle. "Walk with me." Sarah struggled to her feet and followed the sergeant out of the training facility and into the corridor beyond. The walls were lined with portraits of famous Terran military heroes, men and women who had led humanity to victory against impossible odds. Sarah's grandmother, Admiral Chen, was among them. The woman who had first made contact with alien civilizations and established the protocols that had kept Earth safe for decades. "Your grandmother was one of my instructors when I was coming up through the ranks," Morrison said as they walked. "Tough as nails, brilliant tactician, natural leader. I was hoping to see some of that in you." Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Sergeant." "The thing about your grandmother," Morrison continued, "was that she wasn't always the best at everything. Matter of fact, her first combat review was pretty terrible. But she had something that couldn't be taught in any academy." "What was that?" Morrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "She never gave up. Even when everyone around her thought she was crazy, even when her own superiors questioned her decisions, she kept going. That's not something you can measure in shooting scores or sparring matches. Sarah looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that he was just trying to make her feel better. Are you saying there's hope for me? I'm saying that the best soldiers aren't always the ones who look good in training. Sometimes they're the ones who get knocked down the most, because they're the ones who learn how to get back up. The next morning brought news that would change everything. The Terran Defense Force had received a distress signal from the Outer Rim colony of New Geneva. The settlement was under attack by an unknown alien force, and all communication had been cut off. A rescue mission was being assembled, and due to personnel shortages, even the most junior recruits would be deployed. Sarah found herself assigned to the TDF Resilience, a mid-sized cruiser under the command of Captain Rodriguez. She was part of a squad led by Lieutenant Thompson, a career officer who had specifically requested not to have any untrained recruits on his team. When he saw Sarah's name on the roster, his expression made it clear that he viewed her as dead weight. Great, he muttered, looking at her service record on his tablet. Bottom of every class, failed practical assessments, no real combat experience. Chen, I want you to understand something. This isn't a training exercise. People are going to die out there, and I won't have you getting my people killed because you can't handle yourself. I understand, sir, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a liability. You'll be assigned to communications and support. Don't touch anything important. Don't try to be a hero. And for the love of all that's holy, don't get in the way. The other members of the squad, Webb, Park, and 3 other graduates who had finished in the top 10% of their class, nodded in agreement. Sarah was relegated to carrying extra ammunition and maintaining radio contact with the ship. It was the military equivalent of being the water boy. As the Resilience jumped to hyperspace, Sarah stood at the observation deck and watched the stars stretch into lines of light. Somewhere ahead of them was New Geneva, and somewhere on that planet were people who needed help. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with shooting scores or combat rankings. She didn't know it yet, but this mission would be the beginning of everything. The beginning of a legend that would spread across the galaxy, whispered in the alien languages of humanity's enemies. The beginning of the transformation that would turn Sarah Chen from the Academy's biggest failure into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. But first, she had to survive what was waiting for them on New Geneva. And based on the increasingly urgent reports coming through the communication channels, that was going to be harder than anyone expected. The alien force that had attacked the colony wasn't just some random raiders or pirates. The energy signatures they were picking up suggested technology far more advanced than anything in human space. This was first contact with a hostile alien civilization. And Sarah Chen, the worst soldier in the Terran Defense Force, was about to be thrust into the front lines of humanity's newest war. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace and New Geneva appeared on the main screen, wreathed in smoke and flickering with the light of fires, Sarah checked her equipment one more time. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her communicator and checked her ammunition supplies. Around her, the other squad members prepared with the calm efficiency of trained professionals. Lieutenant Thompson gathered them for a final briefing. Intel suggests we're looking at a force of approximately 50 hostiles, armed with energy weapons and some kind of personal shields. They've taken control of the main settlement and are holding the colonists hostage. Our job is to get in, extract as many civilians as possible, and gather intelligence on this new threat. He looked directly at Sarah. Chen, you're staying with the landing craft. Monitor communications and be ready to call for extraction if things go sideways. This is not a request. Sarah wanted to protest to prove that she could be useful, but she simply nodded. Maybe Thompson was right. Maybe she wasn't ready for this kind of action. The landing craft descended through New Geneva's atmosphere, and Sarah got her first look at the devastation below. The colony that had once been home to 50,000 people was now a burning ruin. Entire city blocks had been reduced to rubble, and strange alien aircraft patrolled the skies like metallic predators. As they touched down in a wooded area several kilometers from the main settlement, Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was really happening. She was about to see actual combat for the first time in her life. The squad moved out, leaving Sarah alone with the pilot and the communication equipment. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Thompson's voice came through the radio, calm and professional, as he reported their progress toward the settlement. They had made contact with a group of surviving colonists hiding in the industrial district and were preparing to begin evacuations. Then everything went wrong. The attack came without warning. Sarah heard the screaming first, then the sound of energy weapons firing rapidly. Thompson's voice crackled through the static, shouting orders and coordinates, but Sarah could hear the panic underneath his professional composure. "Taking heavy fire! They're everywhere! Request immediate backup!" Sarah grabbed the microphone. "Thompson, this is base camp. What's your situation?" "They were waiting for us." "It's an ambush. We're pinned down in Sector 7 and we've got wounded." The radio fell silent except for static. Sarah tried repeatedly to re-establish contact, but there was no response. She looked at the pilot, a veteran named Johnson, who had seen action in the border conflicts with the Centauri pirates. "We have to do something," Sarah said. Johnson shook his head. "Orders are to stay put. If Thompson's squad is compromised, we extract and call for reinforcements." But Sarah was already moving, checking her weapon and grabbing the medical supplies from the landing craft's emergency kit. "I'm not leaving them out there! Chen!" Johnson called after her. "You'll just get yourself killed." Sarah paused at the edge of the tree line. In the distance, she could see the glow of fires and the occasional flash of energy weapons. Somewhere in that chaos, her squad mates were fighting for their lives. The same people who had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her like dead weight. They needed help, and she was the only one in position to provide it. For a moment, all her training came back to her, not the failed shooting tests or the embarrassing sparring matches, but the lessons about duty and honor and never leaving a soldier behind. The lessons about what it meant to wear the uniform of the Terran Defense Force. Sarah Chen, the worst recruit in the history of the Academy, took her first steps into the burning colony of New Geneva. She had no idea that this decision would change the course of the war that was about to engulf the galaxy. She had no idea that the alien she was about to face would one day speak her name with a mixture of respect and terror. All she knew was that her people needed help, and she was going to give it to them, even if it killed her. The fires of New Geneva burned brighter as she disappeared into the smoke, and the legend of the Ghost Commander took its first breath. Sarah moved through the abandoned streets of New Geneva like a ghost, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfares where alien patrol craft swept the area with searchlights. The colony had been beautiful once. She could see that even through the destruction. Tree-lined streets, carefully planned neighborhoods, parks where children had played just days before. Now it was a wasteland of broken glass and twisted metal. The sound of energy weapons grew louder as she approached Sector 7. She could hear human voices shouting in the distance, and the harsh, clicking sounds that she assumed were alien communications. Her hands trembled as she gripped her rifle, and she forced herself to remember her breathing exercises from basic training. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Stay calm. Stay focused. She reached the edge of the industrial district and crouched behind an overturned cargo hauler. From here, she could see the building where Thompson's squad had taken shelter, a large warehouse with broken windows and scorch marks along its walls. Surrounding it were at least 20 alien soldiers, unlike anything Sarah had ever seen before. They were tall, easily 7 feet in height, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shift color like oil on water. They wore form-fitting armor that hummed with energy, and their weapons looked organic, as if they had been grown rather than manufactured. Most disturbing were their faces, elongated skulls with multiple sets of eyes that moved independently of each other, constantly scanning for threats. Sarah activated her communicator, keeping the volume low. "Thompson, do you copy? This is Chen." Static filled her earpiece for several seconds, then Thompson's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Chen? What the hell are you doing here? I told you to stay with the landing craft." "I'm in position to provide support. What's your situation?" We're trapped on the second floor of the warehouse. Webb took a hit to the shoulder, and we're running low on ammunition. There are too many of them, Chen. We can't break out. Sarah studied the alien positions through her rifle scope. They had set up a perfect perimeter around the building, with overlapping fields of fire and what looked like some kind of energy shield generators protecting their flanks. It was a textbook tactical deployment, except it was being executed by aliens who supposedly had no knowledge of human military doctrine. How did they know you were coming? Sarah asked. That's the million-credit question. They were waiting for us, like they knew exactly where we'd land and what route we'd take. Either they're reading our communications or what? Thompson's voice was grim. Or they've been studying us for a lot longer than we thought. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. First contact with a hostile alien species was supposed to be humanity's advantage. Earth had spent decades preparing for this scenario, developing tactics and strategies based on the assumption that they would be the ones with superior intelligence and coordination. But if these aliens had been observing human military operations, studying their procedures and responses, a new sound cut through her thoughts, the high-pitched whine of an alien energy weapon charging up. She looked through her scope and saw one of the aliens adjusting what looked like a heavy artillery piece, aiming it directly at the warehouse. Thompson, they're bringing up heavy weapons. You need to move, now. There's nowhere to go. The whole building is surrounded. Sarah's mind raced. In all her tactical training, she had learned about situations like this. When conventional approaches failed, sometimes the only option was to do something completely unexpected, something so crazy that the enemy couldn't possibly plan for it. She looked at the alien positions again, noting the patrol patterns and the gaps in their coverage. There was one spot near the eastern wall of the warehouse where the aliens had positioned their shield generators but left a narrow blind spot. It was a 20-meter sprint across open ground, with no cover except for a few pieces of debris. Any sane person would call it suicide. Sarah Chen had spent months being told she wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't brave enough to be a real soldier. Maybe it was time to find out if they were right. She keyed her communicator one more time. Thompson, in 30 seconds I want you and your squad to make as much noise as possible. Draw their attention to the north side of the building. Chen, what are you planning? Something stupid, Sarah replied and started running. She sprinted across the open ground, her boots pounding against the broken pavement. Behind her, she could hear Thompson's squad opening fire, their weapons crackling against the alien shields. The aliens responded immediately, turning their attention toward the warehouse and away from the lone figure racing toward their position. Sarah reached the eastern wall and pressed herself against the concrete, breathing hard. So far, so good. Now came the hard part. The shield generator was a cylindrical device about the size of a garbage can, humming with energy and surrounded by a faint blue glow. Sarah had no idea how it worked, but she knew enough about military equipment to recognize a power coupling when she saw one. She pulled a grenade from her belt, set the timer for 5 seconds, and placed it directly against the coupling. The explosion shattered the generator in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Immediately, the energy shield protecting the eastern flank flickered and died, leaving the aliens exposed. But Sarah didn't have time to appreciate her handiwork. The blast had attracted attention, and she could hear alien voices clicking angrily in her direction. She rolled away from the wall just as energy bolts began striking where she had been standing. The aliens were fast, but they were also confused. Their perfect perimeter had been breached, and they were trying to figure out how. Sarah found cover behind a pile of rubble and opened fire. Her first shot went wide as usual, but her second caught one of the aliens in the chest. To her amazement, the creature's armor flickered and failed, and it collapsed to the ground. "Chen!" Thompson's voice crackled through her earpiece. "The shield's down! We're moving." Sarah watched as Thompson's squad burst from the warehouse, taking advantage of the gap in the alien perimeter. They moved with the precision of trained soldiers, covering each other as they advanced toward the rendezvous point she had suggested. But the aliens were adapting quickly. Sarah could see them reorganizing, bringing their heavy weapons to bear on the escaping humans. In seconds, Thompson and his people would be caught in a crossfire that would cut them to pieces. Sarah looked at her position, then at the alien deployment, and made another insane decision. She stood up from her cover and started running directly toward the largest concentration of alien soldiers, firing her rifle and screaming at the top of her lungs. The aliens turned toward her, confused by this apparent suicide charge. Their weapons swung in her direction, energy bolts crackling past her head as she zigzagged across the battlefield. She was drawing their fire away from Thompson's squad, giving them the distraction they needed to escape. She almost made it to cover before the energy bolt caught her in the leg, sending her tumbling to the ground in an explosion of pain. Her rifle skittered away across the pavement, leaving her defenseless as the aliens advanced on her position. Sarah tried to crawl toward her weapon, but her leg wouldn't support her weight. The aliens were getting closer, their multiple eyes fixed on her as they approached with weapons raised. She had bought Thompson's squad the time they needed, but it was going to cost her everything. That's when she heard the sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The aliens stopped their advance and began looking around nervously, clicking and chittering to each other in what sounded like alarm. The sky above New Geneva began to change color, shifting from blue to a sickly green. And from that green sky, shapes began to descend, massive, organic-looking vessels that dwarfed the smaller craft that had been patrolling the colony. Sarah watched in fascination and horror as the alien soldiers around her dropped to the ground in what could only be described as prostration. They were bowing, pressing their elongated faces to the dirt as the massive ships settled onto the surface of New Geneva with the sound of rushing wind. From the largest vessel, a ramp extended toward the ground, and down that ramp walked a figure that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was taller than the other aliens, perhaps 8 feet in height, with armor that seemed to be made of living metal. Its multiple eyes glowed with an inner light, and when it moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around it. This was clearly a leader, a commander of some kind. The creature approached Sarah's position, its feet making no sound on the broken pavement. The other aliens remained prostrate as it passed, not daring to look up at their superior. When it reached Sarah, it stopped and looked down at her with an expression that might have been curiosity. Sarah tried to back away, but her injured leg made movement impossible. She was trapped, helpless, at the mercy of what was clearly a high-ranking alien officer. She expected to be killed immediately, or worse, taken prisoner for interrogation and torture. Instead, the alien did something that changed everything. It spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "You are the one who destroyed our perimeter shield." Sarah's mouth fell open. Not only could this creature speak her language, but its voice carried an undertone that suggested vast intelligence and authority. This wasn't some mindless monster. This was a military commander who had studied humanity enough to learn their communications. Yes, Sarah managed to say. The alien tilted its head, studying her with those glowing eyes. "You employed an unconventional tactical approach, sacrificing your own safety to create a diversion for your companions. This is not standard human military doctrine." "How would you know about human military doctrine?" The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. "We have been observing your species for some time, Sarah Chen. We know your strategies, your weaknesses, your patterns of thought. We know that human soldiers follow predictable protocols in combat situations." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Not only did this creature know about human tactics, it knew her name. "Who are you?" "I am War Commander Zeltar of the Hegemony First Fleet. And you, Junior Trooper Chen, have done something no human has managed in our previous encounters." "What's that?" The alien's eyes seemed to brighten. "You surprised us." Zeltar gestured to the prostrate soldiers around them. "These warriors have conquered 17 species across 4 star systems. They have never encountered an enemy who could anticipate their movements, counter their strategies, or disrupt their formations. Until today." Sarah tried to process what she was hearing. "You're saying we won? You're saying that your ragtag squad of inexperienced soldiers managed to escape a perfectly executed ambush through sheer improvisation and tactical creativity. Yes, Junior Trooper Chen. In this engagement, you won. The war commander extended what might have been a hand toward Sarah. Rise, young tactician. We have much to discuss. Sarah stared at the offered appendage, her mind racing. Something was happening here that went far beyond a simple rescue mission. The most powerful alien military force in the galaxy was treating her, the worst soldier in the Terran Defense Force, with what looked suspiciously like respect. I don't understand, Sarah said. Understanding will come, Zeltar replied. For now, know this. Your name has been entered into our records as a commander worthy of our attention. The hegemony does not forget those who demonstrate true tactical brilliance. As Sarah reached out to take the alien's hand, she had no idea that this moment was being recorded by dozens of alien surveillance devices. She didn't know that within hours her image and name would be transmitted across the galaxy to every hegemony commander and strategist. She couldn't possibly imagine that she had just become the first human to earn the respect of an alien military force that had never acknowledged any other species as their equal. All she knew was that something fundamental had changed in the relationship between humanity and the galaxy beyond Earth's solar system, and somehow, impossibly, she was at the center of it all. The legend of the Ghost Commander had just taken its second breath, and the galaxy would never be the same. War Commander Zeltar helped Sarah to her feet with surprising gentleness. Up close, she could see that the alien's armor was indeed alive. Tiny circuits of light pulsed beneath its surface like a slow heartbeat, and she could swear she heard it whispering in a language that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her mind. Your injury requires attention, Zeltar observed, noting the energy burn on Sarah's leg. With a gesture, one of the prostrate aliens rose and approached, carrying what looked like a medical device that resembled a cross between a scanner and a jellyfish. Sarah instinctively tried to back away, but Zeltar raised a hand. Peace, young tactician. Medic Vorthak is highly skilled. The device will accelerate your cellular regeneration and seal the wound. Why are you helping me? Sarah asked, wincing as the alien medic began working on her leg. The device felt warm against her skin, and to her amazement, the pain began to fade almost immediately. Zeltar's multiple eyes regarded her with what might have been amusement. Because you have demonstrated something we believed impossible, that humans are capable of genuine tactical innovation. Your species has been observed for cycles, and until today, your military responses have been entirely predictable. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm healing sensation in her leg. How long have you been watching us? Since your first crude attempts at faster-than-light travel, we have monitored your expansion into space, cataloged your military capabilities, studied your strategic doctrines. The hegemony has protocols for dealing with emerging spacefaring species, and humans appeared to fit the standard pattern. The healing device completed its work, and Sarah found she could stand without pain. Her uniform was still torn where the energy bolt had hit, but underneath, her skin was perfectly healed. She flexed her leg experimentally, marveling at the alien technology. What pattern? She asked. Zeltar began walking toward his ship, gesturing for Sarah to follow. The other aliens remained prostrate until their commander had passed, then rose and began securing the area with military precision. Most species follow predictable evolutionary paths, Zeltar explained as they walked. They develop technology, expand into space, establish colonies, and eventually encounter the hegemony. Their military responses fall into standard categories: aggression, diplomacy, submission, or isolation. Humans appeared to be classic aggressors with rigid tactical thinking. They reached the base of the alien ship, and Sarah got her first close look at hegemony technology. The vessel was enormous, at least 2 kilometers long, but its surface seemed to ripple and flow like liquid metal. There were no obvious weapon ports or engine exhausts, just smooth organic curves that suggested the ship had been grown rather than built. But I changed that assessment? Sarah asked. You shattered it completely. Zeltar stopped at the base of the ramp and turned to face her. In 17 previous encounters with human military forces, every engagement proceeded exactly as our strategist predicted. Your soldiers fought bravely but predictably. They followed doctrine, maintained formations, and ultimately fell to superior technology and tactical planning. Sarah thought about her failed training scores, her inability to follow standard procedures, her reputation as the Academy's worst recruit. Perhaps she represents something far more dangerous to the hegemony than we anticipated. Zoltar's tone became more serious. Tell me, Junior Trooper Chen, what did you think when you saw our perimeter formation? Sarah considered the question carefully. It was perfect. Textbook defensive positioning with overlapping fields of fire and redundant shield coverage. Any conventional assault would have failed. Correct. And yet you identified and exploited a weakness that our own strategists had not considered. The shield generators were vulnerable to close assault, but only if someone was willing to sacrifice tactical positioning to get close enough. Zeltar's eyes brightened. And therein lies the difference. A conventional military mind sees the sacrifice of tactical position as an error, a deviation from optimal strategy. But you saw it as an opportunity. They began climbing the ramp into the ship, and Sarah marveled at the interior. The corridors were wide and curved, lit by the same living light that pulsed through Zeltar's armor. Everything was organic, flowing, alive in a way that human technology could never match. "Where are you taking me?" Sarah asked. "To meet someone who has been very eager to speak with you." They arrived at what appeared to be the ship's command center, a vast chamber filled with holographic displays showing tactical data from across the galaxy. Dozens of aliens worked at stations that seemed to respond to thought rather than touch. At the center of it all stood another alien, even taller than Zeltar, with armor that seemed to contain actual stars. When it turned to face them, Sarah felt a pressure in her mind like standing too close to a black hole. "Supreme War Commander Kethmora," Zeltar said, bowing deeply. "I present Junior Trooper Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force." Kethmora approached with movements that seemed to bend space around them. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that made Sarah's bones vibrate. "So this is the human who disrupted our perfect formation." The Supreme War Commander circled Sarah like a predator studying prey. Small, weak, young. And yet our sensors detected tactical thinking that exceeded our predictive models by orders of magnitude. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I just did what seemed logical at the time." "Logical?" Kethmora's laugh was like the sound of stars being born. "You executed a suicidal charge against overwhelming odds to create a diversion for your companions. By what definition is that logical? It was the only option that had a chance of working." Kethmora stopped circling and fixed all their eyes on Sarah. "Explain." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts under the intense scrutiny. "Your formation was perfect for dealing with conventional tactics, but it was designed to counter rational behavior, soldiers who valued their own lives and followed standard doctrine. The only way to disrupt it was to do something completely irrational. And you were willing to sacrifice yourself for this small tactical advantage? I was willing to do whatever it took to save my squad." The two alien commanders exchanged what Sarah recognized as significant glances. Kethmora activated a holographic display that showed tactical analyses from dozens of previous engagements with human forces. "Observe," Kethmora said, 17 encounters with human military units. In every case, human commanders prioritized preservation of their forces over tactical advantage. They withdrew when casualties reached acceptable levels, regrouped when facing superior firepower, and never risked their own lives unnecessarily. The display shifted to show Sarah's actions on New Geneva, rendered in perfect three-dimensional detail. But you ignored all of these patterns, you risked everything for no guarantee of success. Why? Sarah thought about Thompson and Webb, about Lisa Park and the other recruits who had mocked her but still deserved to go home to their families. "Because they were my responsibility." "Your responsibility?" Zeltar interjected. "You were the lowest-ranked member of the squad. You had no authority, no leadership position. That doesn't matter. We wore the same uniform. We served the same cause. That made them my responsibility. Kethmora's armor pulsed with excited energy. Do you understand what you have revealed to us, young human? Sarah shook her head, confused by the alien's reaction. You have demonstrated that human military thinking is not as rigid as we believed, that your species is capable of genuine sacrifice, of tactical thinking that transcends individual survival. This changes our entire strategic assessment of humanity. The holographic display shifted again, showing star maps with human colonies marked in blue and hegemony territories in red. Sarah could see that humanity controlled perhaps 1% of the space shown, a tiny cluster of worlds surrounded by the vast expanse of the alien empire. For cycles, we have debated whether to incorporate humanity into the hegemony through conquest or to allow you to develop naturally until you pose a genuine threat, Kethmora explained. Your species showed promise but lacked the tactical creativity necessary to challenge our dominance. And now? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Now we realize that we may have been observing the wrong humans. Zeltar gestured to the tactical display. Every engagement we studied involved career military officers, soldiers trained in conventional doctrine and standard procedures. But you represent something different. Kethmora activated another display, this one showing Sarah's academy records. Her failed shooting scores, her terrible combat evaluations, her last-place rankings in every category, your own military considered you a failure. And yet, when faced with an impossible situation, you succeeded where your supposedly superior colleagues would have failed. Sarah stared at her own records, seeing them through alien eyes for the first time. You think there are others like me? We believe that human military training may be actively suppressing the very qualities that make your species potentially dangerous, Kethmora replied. Creativity, improvisation, willingness to sacrifice for abstract concepts like honor and duty. Your academy teaches you to think like us, to follow predictable patterns. But what if they taught you to think like yourselves? Zeltar added, what if humanity embraced the chaotic, unpredictable aspects of your nature instead of trying to suppress them? The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're afraid of us. We are concerned, Kethmora admitted. The hegemony has maintained galactic stability for 1,000 cycles by predicting and countering potential threats before they fully develop. But a species that can produce tacticians like you, the Supreme War Commander's armor dimmed slightly. Such a species could pose challenges we have never faced. Sarah looked around the command center, taking in the advanced technology, the tactical displays showing hegemony dominance across dozens of star systems, the obvious superiority of everything she was seeing. Your technology, your ships, your weapons. Technology can be countered by superior technology, Zeltar said, but tactical genius, that is something else entirely. In all our encounters with spacefaring species, we have never faced an enemy who could consistently surprise us, who could turn their weaknesses into advantages. Is that what I did? Consider your position on New Geneva, Kethmora said. Activating a replay of the battle, you were outnumbered, outgunned, facing an enemy with superior technology and tactical positioning. By every rational calculation, you should have failed. Instead, you turned your weakness into strength. Sarah watched herself charge across the open ground, drawing alien fire away from her squad. I was terrified the whole time. Fear is a weakness. Unless, Zeltar paused, considering, unless you can use it as a weapon. You were afraid, so you acted in a way that no fearless warrior would consider. Your very weakness became unpredictable. The hegemony has protocols for dealing with brave enemies, cowardly enemies, desperate enemies, Kethmora added, but we have no protocols for enemies who are all of these things simultaneously, who can be weak and strong, logical and insane, heroic and terrified at the same moment. A new alarm began sounding throughout the command center, and Sarah saw alien officers responding to incoming communications. Kethmora's expression grew serious as they received reports from across the galaxy. What is it? Sarah asked. Word of your tactical innovation has reached other hegemony commanders, Zeltar explained. They are requesting immediate strategic reassessment of all human-controlled territories. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. You're going to attack Earth. Not attack, Kethmora corrected. Study. If you represent the true potential of human tactical thinking, then we need to understand the full scope of the threat before it develops further. But that will mean war, perhaps. Or perhaps it will mean something unprecedented in hegemony history. The Supreme War Commander's armor pulsed with complex patterns. For the first time in 1,000 cycles, we have encountered a species that might be worthy of alliance rather than conquest. Sarah's mind reeled. Alliance? The hegemony maintains stability through strength and predictability. But even we face threats that require unconventional responses. Perhaps it is time to consider whether humanity's chaotic nature could be an asset rather than a liability. Zeltar gestured to the star maps surrounding them. The galaxy is vast, Junior Trooper Chen. There are forces moving in the darkness beyond our borders, threats that our traditional strategies may not be sufficient to counter. If your species can truly think in ways that we cannot predict, then perhaps the hegemony needs allies who can surprise our enemies as thoroughly as you surprised us today, Kethmora finished. Sarah looked out at the stars visible through the command center's transparent walls, understanding for the first time that she had stumbled into something far larger than a rescue mission on a backwater colony. Humanity's future in the galaxy might depend on convincing the most powerful military force in known space that the species' greatest weakness, their unpredictability, was actually their greatest strength. And somehow that responsibility had fallen to Sarah Chen, the worst soldier in the Terran Defense Force. The Ghost Commander was about to become much more than a legend whispered in alien languages. She was about to become the bridge between two species who might just need each other more than either side realized. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the hegemony command ship Inevitable Convergence, watching through the view screen as the massive alien fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Earth hung in the distance like a blue jewel, completely unaware that the fate of humanity was about to be decided in the space between Mars and Jupiter. The past 3 weeks had been the strangest of Sarah's life. Instead of being returned to Earth as a prisoner or casualty, she had been kept aboard the hegemony flagship as what Kethmora termed a strategic consultant. She had been given quarters that were luxurious by human standards, access to alien technology that her own scientists could only dream of, and most importantly, a front-row seat to the hegemony's strategic planning process. What she had learned had both amazed and terrified her. The hegemony was not simply a military empire. It was a carefully constructed system designed to maintain galactic stability through overwhelming force and predictable outcomes. Every species they encountered was thoroughly studied, categorized, and either incorporated into their hierarchy or eliminated as a threat. It was a process that had worked flawlessly for over 1,000 years. Until humanity came along. Report from the Advance Scouts. Zeltar announced from his position at the tactical console. Terran Defense Force ships are moving to intercept. 7 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and 1 battleship. Admiral Chen commanding. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her grandmother was leading the Earth Defense Fleet just as she had during the first alien contact protocols decades earlier. But those had been peaceful encounters with species seeking trade and diplomatic relations. This was something entirely different. Standard formation? Kethmora inquired. Textbook defensive positioning, Zeltar confirmed. Layered screens with the battleship as a command center. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding we identify ourselves and state our intentions. Sarah watched the tactical display as the human ships moved into position. It was exactly what the hegemony strategists had predicted. Rational, logical, by-the-book military doctrine that would be completely ineffective against alien technology and superior numbers. Will you answer them? Sarah asked. Kethmora's multiple eyes fixed on her. That depends on you, young tactician. The purpose of this expedition is to determine whether humanity as a species possesses the qualities you demonstrated on New Geneva, or whether you are merely an anomaly. How can you possibly test that? By giving you an opportunity to prevent this conflict from becoming a massacre. The Supreme War Commander activated a communication console. You will speak with your grandmother's fleet. You will inform them that the hegemony offers humanity a choice, demonstrate tactical innovation worthy of alliance, or face incorporation into our empire. Sarah felt the weight of an entire species settling on her shoulders. And if they refuse? Then we will discover whether Admiral Chen possesses the same unconventional thinking as her granddaughter. Kethmora's armor pulsed ominously. If she does not, the Earth Defense Fleet will be destroyed as an example to your species. The communication channel opened and suddenly Sarah was looking at her grandmother's face on the main screen. Admiral Chen looked older than Sarah remembered, her silver hair pulled back in a severe military bun, her expression stern and uncompromising. Behind her, Sarah could see the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, with officers at their stations preparing for battle. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. Her grandmother began, then stopped as she recognized Sarah's face. Sarah, what in God's name are you doing on an alien ship? Hello, grandmother, Sarah said, acutely aware that hundreds of alien eyes were watching her every move. I'm here as a representative of the hegemony. They want to speak with humanity. Representative? Admiral Chen's voice hardened. You're a junior trooper who should be on her first posting to some supply depot. How did you end up on a hostile alien vessel? Sarah glanced at Kethmora, who gestured for her to continue. It's complicated, but right now, you need to know that the hegemony isn't here to conquer Earth. They're here to test us. Test us how? They want to see if humanity is capable of true tactical innovation, or if we're just another predictable species that follows standard military doctrine. Admiral Chen's expression grew skeptical. And they're basing this test on your performance as a failed recruit? The word stung, but Sarah pushed through the pain. I didn't fail at New Geneva, grandmother. I did something they didn't expect. Something that made them reconsider everything they thought they knew about human military thinking. Which was? Sarah took a deep breath. I ignored doctrine and did something completely irrational, and it worked. On the tactical display, Sarah could see the human ships maintaining their defensive formation. It was exactly what the hegemony had predicted, and she could see alien officers making notes on their analysis tablets. Her grandmother was walking into a trap that had been set by 1,000 years of military experience. Admiral, Sarah said urgently, you cannot fight them conventionally. They've studied every human military engagement for decades. They know exactly how you're going to respond to any tactical situation. Then what do you suggest? Sarah looked around the alien command center, noting the positions of officers, the layout of critical systems, the assumed patterns of operation. An idea began to form. Insane, desperate, and completely contrary to every principle of military strategy she had ever learned. Do something they can't predict, Sarah said. Do something so crazy that their strategic models can't account for it, such as... Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Then she saw it, a tactical option so insane that even she could barely believe she was considering it. Surrender, she said quietly. What did you say? Surrender to them, completely. Lower your shields, power down your weapons, and offer to submit to hegemony authority.
Admiral Chen's face went pale.
Sarah, have you lost your mind? I will not surrender the Earth Defense Fleet to an alien empire. You won't be surrendering, Sarah explained, her voice gaining confidence as the plan took shape. You'll be doing something so unexpected that it will completely disrupt their tactical assessment. They're expecting you to fight. They've planned for every possible combat scenario, but they have no protocol for an enemy that voluntarily submits. Because it's suicide, is it? Sarah gestured to the alien officers around her. Look at them, grandmother. They're warriors, but they're also scholars. They study their enemies, analyze their behaviors, predict their responses. What happens when an enemy refuses to be predictable? Admiral Chen's tactical mind began working through the implications. They would have to reassess everything. Exactly. And while they're trying to figure out what you're doing, you'll be in a position to observe their technology, their procedures, their weaknesses, information that could be far more valuable than anything you could gain through conventional combat. And if they simply destroy us anyway, Sarah looked at Kethmora, who had been listening to the entire conversation with evident fascination. They won't, because we've already proven that humanity is worth studying. If you can demonstrate the same kind of unconventional thinking that brought us to this point, they'll have to treat us as potential allies rather than just another conquest. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, considering options that went against every instinct she had developed in 40 years of military service. Around her, Sarah could see the other officers on the bridge looking increasingly concerned. "This goes against everything I've ever been taught about command," Admiral Chen finally said. "I know. But conventional command isn't going to save humanity. The only chance we have is to be something the hegemony has never encountered before. And you believe they'll honor such an arrangement? I believe they're more interested in understanding us than destroying us, but only if we can prove we're worth understanding." Admiral Chen turned away from the screen and began conferring with her officers. Sarah could see heated discussions, gestures of disbelief, and what looked like outright arguments. Several minutes passed before her grandmother returned to the communication station.
"The fleet will power down weapons and lower shields," Admiral Chen announced.
"But I want your personal guarantee that this isn't a trap." "I can't guarantee anything," Sarah replied honestly, "but I can promise you that this is humanity's best chance to avoid a war we can't win." Admiral Chen nodded grimly and cut the communication. On the tactical display, Sarah watched as the human ships began powering down their weapons and dropping their defensive shields. It was a sight that no hegemony strategist had ever witnessed, an entire fleet voluntarily making itself defenseless in the face of overwhelming enemy force. The alien command center erupted in excited chatter as officers tried to process what they were seeing. Kethmora's armor pulsed with rapid patterns, and several junior officers approached with urgent reports and analysis requests. "Unprecedented," Zeltar muttered, studying the tactical displays. "There is no protocol for this scenario." "Which means we're in uncharted territory," Sarah said. "Exactly where we need to be." Kethmora approached her with what she had learned to recognize as barely contained excitement. "Your grandmother has just demonstrated the same tactical thinking that you employed on New Geneva. She has turned weakness into unpredictability, vulnerability into opportunity." "Does that mean the test is over?" "The test has just begun." Kethmora activated ship-wide communications. "All vessels maintain defensive positions but do not target the human ships. Prepare boarding shuttles for diplomatic contact." What happens now? Now we discover whether humanity can maintain this level of tactical innovation when faced with the true challenges that await in the galaxy beyond your solar system. Zeltar showed her a new star map, this one displaying territories in the galactic rim where strange symbols marked unknown threats. "The hegemony has maintained stability for 1,000 cycles," Kethmora explained, "but our sensors detect disturbances in the outer reaches, forces that do not respond to conventional military pressure, entities that seem to exist outside normal space-time. We have tried to address these threats using traditional tactics, and we have failed." Sarah studied the map, noting the cluster of unknown symbols gradually expanding toward hegemony territory. "You think humanity might be able to help? We think that a species capable of tactical thinking that surprises even us might be exactly what the galaxy needs." Kethmora's multiple eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "But first, you must prove that your unconventional approach can work on a larger scale." "How?" "By taking command of a joint human hegemony task force and leading them against one of these outer rim threats. By demonstrating that human tactical innovation can succeed where hegemony doctrine has failed." Sarah's mind reeled at the implications. "You want me to command alien warships? We want you to command whatever forces are necessary to protect both our species from threats that neither of us fully understand." Zeltar gestured to the stars beyond the view screen. "The galaxy is far stranger and more dangerous than either humanity or the hegemony realized. Perhaps it will take both of our approaches to military thinking to survive what's coming." As Sarah watched her grandmother's ships moving into formation with the alien fleet, she realized that her failure at the Academy had been the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. The worst soldier in the Terran Defense Force was about to become the first human to command alien warships in defense of civilizations she had never imagined. The Ghost Commander was about to become very real indeed, and the galaxy was about to discover what happened when human unpredictability met threats that existed beyond conventional understanding of warfare itself. In the distance, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that the future of human civilization now rested in the hands of the granddaughter who had once been considered too much of a failure to trust with a simple supply depot assignment. 6 months after the encounter at Sol, Sarah stood on the command deck of the hybrid vessel Unity's Edge, watching as her mixed human hegemony fleet approached the edge of known space. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperation. Human engineering intuition merged with hegemony technology to create something neither species could have built alone. The crew was even more remarkable. Human officers worked alongside alien strategists, sharing tactical theories that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Lieutenant Thompson, fully recovered from his injuries on New Geneva, served as her second-in-command, while War Commander Zeltar provided tactical analysis from the hegemony perspective. But today, as they approached the coordinates where 3 hegemony battle fleets had simply vanished, Sarah felt the weight of expectation from both species pressing down on her shoulders. Earth's military leadership still couldn't quite believe that their worst recruit had become humanity's first interstellar naval commander. The hegemony, meanwhile, watched her every decision with the intensity of scientists studying a new form of life. Contact on long-range sensors, reported Ensign Park, Lisa's younger sister, who had specifically requested assignment to Sarah's crew. It's unusual. Sarah moved to the sensor station, studying the readouts that made no sense according to conventional physics. Define unusual. The object appears to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our sensors show it as a sphere, a cube, and something that doesn't have a name in any language I know. Zeltar's multiple eyes focused on his own tactical displays. The sensor readings match those from our lost fleets. Whatever destroyed them, this is where it began. Sarah studied the impossible sensor data, her mind working through tactical possibilities that defied everything she had learned about space warfare. Over the past 6 months, she had been given access to hegemony records of the Outer Rim incidents. Entire battle groups had been eliminated without any apparent weapons being fired. Ships had simply stopped existing, leaving behind only empty space and confused distress signals. Thompson, bring us to alert status, but do not raise shields or charge weapons, Sarah ordered. Commander? Thompson's voice carried a note of confusion. We're approaching a potentially hostile contact that has already destroyed multiple fleets, which means that shields and weapons didn't help those fleets. We need to try something different. Sarah activated the ship-wide communication system. All stations, this is the Commander. We are about to make contact with an unknown entity that has destroyed several hegemony battle groups. Standard military doctrine has proven ineffective against this threat, so we are going to approach it with no hostile intent whatsoever. She could hear murmurs of concern from both human and alien crew members, but no one questioned her orders. They had all seen what conventional thinking had accomplished against these outer rim threats. Take us in slowly, minimal engine power, and broadcast on all frequencies that we come in peace, Sarah continued. I want our intentions to be absolutely clear. As they approached the impossible object, Sarah began to understand why previous fleets had failed. The thing they were approaching wasn't just a ship or a weapon, it was something that existed according to rules that neither human nor hegemony science could fully comprehend. Looking at it too directly made her eyes water, as if her brain was trying to process visual input that wasn't designed for three-dimensional thinking. Commander, Zeltar announced, we are receiving a communication, but it's not coming through our receivers. Where is it coming from? Everywhere. The words are appearing directly in our minds. Sarah felt it then, a voice that spoke without sound, words that bypassed her ears and wrote themselves directly onto her consciousness. Why do you come to this place? The question carried overtones that suggested vast intelligence and something that might have been curiosity. Sarah stepped forward, addressing the empty air in front of her. We come seeking understanding. Our peoples have lost ships in this region, and we want to know what happened to them. Your peoples? The mental voice carried what sounded like surprise. You speak of multiple species as unified. This is unexpected. Human and hegemony forces working together, Sarah confirmed. We've learned that some threats require cooperation rather than conventional military response. There was a pause, and Sarah felt the entity's attention focusing on her ship with uncomfortable intensity. We have observed the patterns of the flesh beings who traverse the void. They follow predictable responses to perceived threats: attack, defend, retreat, negotiate, but you approach with weapons silent and shields lowered. Because weapons and shields didn't work for the others who came here. Correct. Those who came before assumed we were a threat to be conquered or an obstacle to be destroyed. They could not conceive of other possibilities. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. You're not hostile. You were defending yourself. 1723. We exist in accordance with laws that your kind call physics, but which we experience as art. When beings approach us with thoughts of violence and domination, we must respond in kind. Your thoughts create the reality you encounter. Zeltar's equipment began registering massive energy readings as the entity's attention focused more intently on their ship. But instead of the destructive force that had eliminated previous fleets, Sarah sensed something more like evaluation. You think in patterns that differ from your predecessors. The small flesh being who commands this vessel approaches problems from unexpected directions. I've been told that's my defining characteristic, Sarah replied, earning surprised looks from her bridge crew. You interest us. Your thoughts create ripples in probability that we have not observed before. Show us. Suddenly, the space around Unity's edge began to change. Stars vanished and were replaced by geometric shapes that hurt to look at. The ship found itself in what appeared to be a vast arena made of crystallized mathematics with impossible architectures stretching in directions that didn't exist. Commander! Thompson shouted over alerts that were now screaming throughout the ship. We're reading spatial distortions on all sides. Whatever this thing is, it's rewriting the laws of physics around us. Sarah looked out at the impossible arena and felt the weight of both species' expectations crushing down on her. This was the test, not just of her tactical abilities, but of humanity's potential place in a galaxy far stranger than anyone had imagined.
The previous fleets faced challenges suited to their nature, the entity explained.
Warriors who thought as warriors, strategists who perceived only military solutions. But you think as something else entirely. What challenge would test your true capabilities? Sarah studied the crystalline arena, noting that it seemed to shift and change based on her observations. This wasn't a conventional battlefield, it was something that responded to thought itself, to the patterns of consciousness that approached it. You're asking me to design my own test? We are asking you to demonstrate the quality that makes your kind different from the others who have sought to pass through our domain. The entity had eliminated hegemony battle fleets because they had approached it as a military problem. But what if it wasn't a military problem at all? What if the key to passing this test was to think about it in completely non-military terms?
Thompson, power down all weapon systems.
Zeltar, deactivate tactical scanners and threat assessment protocols. Commander, Zeltar protested, we are in completely unknown territory, facing a threat that has destroyed multiple fleets. Surely maintaining some defensive capability is exactly the kind of thinking that got those fleets destroyed, Sarah interrupted. This isn't a military encounter. It's something else entirely. She stepped forward, addressing the entity directly. You said that our thoughts create the reality we encounter. The fleets that came before thought of you as a threat, so you became one. But what if we think of you as something else? Explain. What if we think of you as a teacher? The crystalline arena around them began to shift, mathematical structures rearranging themselves into new configurations. Sarah felt the entity's attention focusing on her with what might have been approval. A teacher. Yes, that is a pattern we have not been offered before. Then teach us, Sarah said. Show us what we need to understand to safely traverse this region of space. The arena around them exploded into motion, crystalline structures forming and dissolving in patterns that conveyed information directly to the mind rather than through conventional senses. Sarah found herself understanding principles of physics that human science had never discovered, perceiving relationships between space and time that hegemony strategists had never imagined. Your people seek to expand into the galaxy, the entity explained as knowledge flowed through the connection. But the galaxy contains forces that cannot be conquered through violence or dominated through superior technology. Some can only be navigated through understanding. Understanding that requires cooperation between species, Sarah realized. Humans and hegemony thinking together, approaching problems from multiple perspectives. The flesh beings who came before were trapped in their own patterns of thought. But you have demonstrated the ability to think beyond the limitations of your own species. The arena around them began to fade, reality reasserting itself as stars returned to their proper positions. But the knowledge remained, flowing through Sarah's mind and into the ship's computers. You may pass, the entity announced. But know that greater challenges await. The galaxy contains intelligences that make us seem simple. Forces that exist beyond the comprehension of any single species. Your cooperation will be tested in ways you cannot yet imagine. As the Unity's edge moved beyond the entity's domain, Sarah felt the weight of what had just happened. They hadn't defeated a threat through superior firepower or brilliant tactics. They had transformed it through a completely different approach to the problem. Commander, Thompson said quietly, what exactly just happened? Sarah looked out at the stars ahead, knowing that somewhere in that vast expanse were challenges that would require everything both species could bring to bear. We learned something, Thompson. We learned that the universe is stranger than we thought, and that maybe our weakness, our unpredictability, our refusal to follow established patterns is actually our greatest strength. Zeltar's tactical displays showed clear space ahead, but also detected massive structures in the distance. Constructs that defied classification, objects that suggested intelligences operating on scales that dwarfed both human and hegemony civilizations. Greater challenges await. Then we'll face them the same way we faced this one, Sarah replied. Together, and with the understanding that some problems can't be solved through conventional thinking. 6 months ago, she had been the worst recruit in the Terran Defense Academy. A failure who couldn't hit a target or follow basic procedures. Now she was the Ghost Commander, the bridge between two species learning to work together against threats that neither could face alone. As the Unity's edge set course for the next set of impossible coordinates, Sarah reflected on how completely wrong everyone had been about her capabilities. Her instructors had seen her failures and missed her potential. Her fellow recruits had mocked her weakness without understanding her strength. But War Commander Zeltar had been right about one thing. The best soldiers weren't always the ones who looked good in training. Sometimes they were the ones who got knocked down the most, because they were the ones who learned how to get back up. And sometimes they were the ones who learned that getting back up wasn't always the answer. Sometimes the answer was to refuse to fight at all, to approach impossible problems from directions that no one expected, to turn weakness into unpredictability and failure into innovation. The Ghost Commander had earned her title through victories that looked nothing like victories, through success that emerged from apparent failure. And as the human hegemony fleet moved deeper into the unknown regions of the galaxy, Sarah Chen, the worst recruit in military history, prepared to face challenges that would test everything both species thought they knew about survival in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation around an ordinary star, unaware that its future, and the future of countless other worlds, was being shaped by the granddaughter who had once been considered too much of a failure to trust with the simplest military assignment. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, Sarah reflected with a smile that would have terrified her old drill instructors, was exactly as it should be. What happens when the weakest link in humanity's military becomes the most feared name in the galaxy? When alien warlords who have never bowed to anyone drop to their knees at the sight of a young woman barely out of basic training, this is the story of Sarah Chen, a junior trooper who couldn't hit a target at 50 meters, who stumbled through drills while her peers laughed, who was written off as the biggest mistake in military recruitment history. But across the stars, in the war rooms of humanity's greatest enemies, her name is whispered with a terror reserved for legends. How did a failed soldier become the ghost commander that turned the tide of an interstellar war? How did someone who couldn't earn the respect of her own squad become the one person that could make alien generals surrender with just her presence? The truth is stranger than any military fiction, more impossible than any war story ever told, because sometimes the greatest warriors aren't forged in victory. They're born in the crucible of everyone's doubt. This is Sarah's story. This is how the galaxy learned never to underestimate humanity's failures.